Okay, so yes, my name is Athina, and I think it's gonna be a bit like that was the linear presentation. This is the non-linear presentation, you know, like the juxtaposition maybe here. Okay, so okay, so this is some work we have done with various people that actually speak to some of the issues that were raised here. So, for example, the turn to emotion and affect. So the book, Disinformation, Polarisation of Emotion, and we looked at how this digital everyday network media are pushing from this rationality deliberation, the Habermasian public sphere, to this affective polarization story. And then I'm going to talk very fast about locating digital activism. In the 1990s, you had the web. Sorry, this microphone, I have to be moving like this, otherwise it won't catch me. So you have like these 2 decades of digital activism, starting with the mid-90s. This has shifted because of Snowden in 2014, so you have 94, 2014, this kind of like a historical development that has forced theoretical development about thinking about digital activism. And then you have this transformation because the austerity, the crisis, and the refugee crisis, the migration crisis was actually not just playing out on digital media and social media networks, but also influencing how discourse and political discourse and polarization was occurring. So it was actually transforming. So the public sphere was not just transforming because of digital media, but all these issues that were played out in that sphere was actually transforming the digital space as well. The last thing that we did, and this is looking at some of the solutions. So people talk about sort of the Uber Airbnb story, and we did some research where we interviewed actors, public policy persons from Airbnb and Uber in Barcelona and other places, and also visionaries of digital governance that were projecting alternative use, alternative ideological production for how platform capitalism could work. And some of this is about platform cooperativism, new alternatives, commons-oriented production, some of which I think philosophically you touched, Natalie, about that. Now, I'm pressing. Okay, so very quickly, when I started sort of working on this around the year 2000 for my PhD, what I started to realize this is before social media even existed. So what you would see then is basically real conflict transferring online. So Israelis were hacking Palestinians, Palestinians were hacking Israelis, Indians were hacking Pakistanis over Kashmir, Americans were hacking Chinese. So that was one thing, and that would fall out this ethno-religious cyber conflict scenario. So who is the other? We're attacking, we're doing graffiti, we're publishing their accounts. That was very early days, 2000, 2001. Now, before that, the socio-political style of things was that the globalization movement started from 1999 with Seattle, and roaming on, if you think about the Occupy Wall Street movement, it comes from a history of mobilization about the global justice story and pre-existing networks. And to analyze that, we're looking at the social movement kind of theory scenarios. How do they use the internet? How they mobilize? How they organize? How they're recruiting people? How basically the framing processes might be changing because you're online? And then what kind of strategy and identity? How do you catch, like, how do you use the internet to mobilize faster? So how do you grasp the political opportunity when the structure opens? So thinking about that, 1989, the Soviet Union falls, and then you have all these countries grasping political opportunity. You have Tiananmen Square, we had the recent anniversary, and so on. And if you think about the Arab Spring, right? Yes, Arab Spring, Tunisia starts, and it opens this political opportunity structure. And it is about the structural conditions in these countries, obviously, not because you had social media and all sort of like this hype about social media. You had the structural conditions where you had like this domino, like snowball of revolutions. And how social media enable these movements and these actors to grasp this opportunity was very important. Now, I'm not going to go to the first element because we're going to be here for a while. But the fourth element in this story is that although, let's say, platforms, the internet, the web, all these different ICTs, technologies, and so on, they are creating different spaces. I mean, that is obvious. Some people talk about web spheres of influence. Some people talk about the digital public sphere, in the sense of the description. So Twitter, for example, is a public sphere for Saudi Arabia because all the mainstream media there are monopolized by the royal family. So obviously, this is where political deliberation actually happens. So you have the public sphere as a descriptive term, the digital public sphere. You have various of those. And some of them are very much censored, like Weibo in China, right? And you have normative notions of the public sphere in the sense of, do we have a democratic space that all voices are heard and people are not trolled and threatened with rape and so on. So in that sense, though, we have the internet or this platform as a medium. So we have to do some kind of traditional media stuff, like who is represented, like how social relations are constructed, who controls information, how do you do censorship, how do you do surveillance, and also like the Wilson model, political contest, who initiates the event, who nominates the discourse, and so on. Now, in the sense of how do you bridge, how do you understand how agents and people that are using this digital media, in that sense, how do they actually relate, and what kind of logic of actions they do and how they do them? And I'm going to basically move a bit from what you were saying in that sense, is that you also have the local, national, and post-national spaces, and how the logic of action in the post-national space is more network, for example. The labor processes are more like immaterial labor related, and the dominant agents are not basically the person that is an embodied human motivated person. It's not just an organization, as in the intentionality of an organization and what it wants to do. It is actually a distributed type of agency, right? So this has changed how people organize and so on. Now, the problem here, and that we're talking about, and I'm going to talk about problems as well. So, do we have a digital public sphere, or are people like in these bubbles? Okay, and for instance, now what we know so far, I'll give you the news. We know that online participation does not include the intention to participate offline. So the fact that you have thousands of people online doesn't mean that they're going to go to the street and protest and so on. And even if they did, there might be a state next door that sends the military in. So even if they do, like in Bahrain, this is the case, or whatever. The other thing that we know is that what is predominant is this self-expression. It is not about creating necessary collective movements. And if you created one, for instance, the pink hat story, the women and the weaving the hat and the go against tyrant, okay, where are these now? Where is this now? So it is about the question about sustainability of these movements as well. So it's more about individualized politics rather than created collective sustained movements. Now, we have seen, for instance, recently Extinction Rebellion and what they're doing, or the youth strikes. Teta Thunberg is on Instagram doing her thing and so on. How does this, does this disrupt or enhance democracy? What is going on here? These questions. And of course, if you were to see this ideologically, I would say it is great to disrupt, because it's a way to, but then what are you proposing to be doing about this? What are your proposals, right? Now, the other thing that we know is that it's more about weak tie relationship rather than strong tie ones. So that means that you have more opportunity to be part of very many groups and movements and whatever, but you're not committed strongly to one organization. And this has effects, doesn't it? Because then you don't have strong membership unless it's party memberships and so on. And the other thing we know is that, for sure, is that especially in authoritarian settings, there's suppression. So the movement by Navalny in Russia, for instance, the Russian dissidents, or in other places, like our colleague was talking about Iran, where he was in prison, and so on, you have like this suppression. And there are places where you cannot mobilize. So people engage mostly in this kind of entrepreneurial activism. We have this center, and we rent the spaces, and artists can be creative here, because you don't actually, you're not allowed to mobilize, yes? So the other thing we know is that there is a wonderful citizen self-expression. But what is the actual impact on political engagement. So the fact that you're online, it might actually mean nothing. In some countries, it can mean a lot. So in a country where homosexuality is forbidden, if you go online and you campaign about that, it is very important because you can be arrested. So it's not just Leaktivism, yeah? So you can see that when we talk about this type of public spheres and so on, and what's happening with digital activism, we have to be careful in where we are. What is the historical context, the political culture? What is the level of censorship? What is the kind of government we're talking about? So some of course, the key issue in digital politics here, the key one, and then I'm going to move on, is that it is not necessary that it will result in a long and sustained political participation among politicians, citizens, and so on. And that is definitely the issue of that it does have, we know this, some kind of impact on voting and campaign and so on, but we cannot exactly measure it. Okay. The other thing we know, I'm going to talk about two things, the political atmosphere. What is the political atmosphere? So, in fact, there is a lot of movements that fight in different countries at this form of quasi-totalitarianism that has to do with how surveillance occurs. Corporate surveillance, government surveillance, surveillance, surveillance. Surveillance is the name of the game. Surveillance capitalism, somebody mentioned it yesterday. Now, the other thing that is going on is who is planning this? So there is a monopoly here on who is planning this thing. And citizens basically vote for governments, and governments are supposed to safeguard these interests in terms of the digital realm. But what happens really is that this is organized, okay, between these government tech corporate elites and sometimes NGOs. These NGOs are often bought by governments and governments and corporate actors as well. And the key issue, and we should not forget it, because a lot of what we're talking about of the symptoms, fake news, polarization, so on, are symptoms of one thing. We are in social media platforms, right? And we're doing civil association on them, thinking that's what they were made for. But actually, they were never made for that. They were made to engage in enterprise association. They were not made to promote democracy in the Middle East and North Africa. They were not made for that, or to promote whatever, public rational deliberation and enlightenment, what was it, affinity groups and love and solidarity. They were made to produce profit, okay? And this is something that lies, this is the paradox. We engage in civil association in platforms that were made for enterprise association. So that is at the heart of what we're talking about here. So fake news, it is an externality that is necessary for the business model of these platforms to work. It cannot work. How can you produce all these thousands of versions of articles that people will click so you can sell your ads if you don't have fake news and versions of stories, if you don't have virality, if you don't have attention-grabbing situation? The model demands it. And also what we know is that people that have been very active in pointing to these issues, pressuring Facebook to declare these transparency reports, that the surveillance activists, leaks, Leaktivism, I'm going to talk some about, they've been persecuted in ways that we all know what these have been. Now, my friend Nikos in Toulouse has published a book in the series I have called Digital Activism Society, and the book is called Internet Oligopoly. So these are, well, obviously Alphabet is Google, yeah, the company is Google there. These are the dominant players. Not, I mean, in terms of money, you can see the money there, talking about that. And I want to tell you in this area that I've been working on in the last possibly about, 10 years or so, and looking at WikiLeaks, DC Leaks, DNC leaks. If there's a leak, I love looking at it. Why are leaks so important? Well, you can call them public disclosure, or you can call them whistleblowing, you can call them whatever you want. It has had a very big impact. Why? Because it relates to a lot of different areas. For example, leaks have been done in relation to Uber, you know, these videos with the drivers and so on, in relation to how it has influenced international relations, in terms of the leaks, the WikiLeaks, the collateral damage video where the multinational force in Iraq was shown to kill journalists, yeah, Reuters journalists on the ground. as if we didn't know. I mean, people were been talking about how the US was attacking journalists in very early, yes, and there was the worst war for journalists ever recorded was the invasion in 2003. Okay. Then you have Leaktivism, where it actually affects elections. Before, in 2016, we had leaks that affected the American elections. We don't know how much, so there's a hype about that. Then we have the leaks in the French elections, where it was stopped, that they said that you should not publish anything about the Macron leaks, right? So you have in every single election, like leaks relate to something, and now we have the recent leaks with the 2 whistleblowers and so on. So you have they are important, okay, because they can create this affective virality online and this polarization. So you would be thinking, oh, Assange is the traitor. Assange is the savior. Assange is not radical enough. We should start another open leaks because he's too centralized. That kind of stuff. Or we should shoot him and keep him in the Ecuadorian embassy as long as possible, and then drag him out and so on. Now, I'm going to show you this because it's one of my favorite slides. The one that is the many read ones is actually the Panama Papers. That is the biggest leak in human history. Okay? That's why I have avoided working on that. Okay. So basically, the Cablegate WikiLeaks 1.7 giga, and then you have the other leaks that are far smaller, but you can see what big difference. And do you have a feeling that you know more about, let's say, WikiLeaks than the Panama Papers? The Panama Papers, the journalists that worked on these leaks in a closed scenario. It wasn't online. You couldn't just go and do stuff. It was a more controlled scenario, and they were important because actually they showed global elites having offshore money in various countries. And if you ever go and research that, you need about 100 pages just to understand who was named and why on those Panama Papers, including Putin, who has donated in some kind of violin teacher, I don't know how many millions, somehow, I don't know what services he was providing. Now, the crackdown as well, and if you see all these people and how it was done, and President Barack Obama actually has gone, it was really hard on these whistleblowers, whistleblowers, that we are very much in favor of him in other respects. I'm not, but some people are. Fantastic. Okay, so I want to talk about some specific leaks I'm going to do in the remaining time. One of them is very important because we're talking about disinformation, architectures, we're talking about fake news, so this is the mothership. The mothership of all that, okay, is the Zook, Commander Zook. So this is a picture of him where he's Data, like from Star Trek, and so it's a kind of a joke. I would encourage you, not just the students that are here, but also colleagues and esteemed individuals and so on, to go and watch some of the testimonies. I think we should start courses in certainly the politics of digital media, internet studies, whatever it is, with the video of Mark Zuckerberg testifying. Because it is a wonderful example of how this guy is telling this senator, it's about ads, right? He's saying it. He's saying it's about ads. I'm not here to safeguard your democracy. So what happened with Facebook is that you had the possibility, because of certain tools in the platform that were open, and it was pointed out to them, you have this open to collect data. And then there was a specific company that decided, with a professor from Cambridge, actually, that's why it's called Cambridge Analytica, he changed his name into Spectrum at some point, as did the Bond villain. I don't know if you know this. This guy really had that name. So you have this peculiar situation where, especially in Southeast Asia, like Cambodia, Philippines, like all these countries, where the dieting of daily news could be even 70% Facebook. Okay, so you have these stories about how they were asking people to play on this app, they're collecting the information. And the beauty of this is, like you said, Massimiliano said, yes, I want to play this game. You were very happy. I'm not saying you did, I'm giving an example.
Okay, sorry.
It wasn't you, don't worry. So Massimiliano said, I want to play this game. And then what happened, you gave access to all your friends as well, but you didn't know. So they collected not just your stuff, but everyone you knew, okay? So that was a bit of a problem, yeah. So just to give you the scandal, this has irritated me a little bit. I have to put it somewhere. Okay, so this is a map. I've taken this from the newspaper, rather the platform newspaper, whatever you want to call it, that broke the story, was The Guardian, one of the newspapers, and this is from there. And this is basically Alexander Kogan, that changed his name at some point in the spectrum, real story. And then you have Global Science Research that processed the data. SCL Elections, I believe a Canadian company, Alexander Nix. You should go and really watch the videos of the whistleblower on this, which is Christopher Wiley, but also there were a couple of more whistleblowers as well. Steve Bannon was, of course, involved, the alt-right, wonderful guy, and of course this is known. Now, I want to talk about where I live in the UK. We are Brexiting, or we're trying to. It's like the last person at the party that you say hello, and 2 days later they're still there drinking, you know, hello. So we are like that, the Brexit people. Now, this is important. Why? This has been actually, the Commission, Electoral Commission, investigated and charged people and charged this organization. And they had to pay, I think, £165,000 as a fine, which is a small price to pay, considering what they did, which was that when you pass £7 million spending, right, you cannot spend anymore. So they decided, oh, we're going to do this other organization called Believe for the young people. They hired these 2 unsuspecting youngsters, right? They had nothing to do with the budget. They weren't controlling anything, but they were actually accused by the commission. So basically, what they did there, they data file custom audiences, website custom audiences, lookalike audiences. They went through the thing and targeted people as well. So this is in terms of that scandal, and that scandal came out because of whistleblowers such as these people, although it's a bit more complex between them and what has happened and why BBC wants to talk to one and not the other or whatever. Now, I want to finish the time. I have like about 7 minutes. And I want to give you a specific example that is not about Cambridge Analytica, or like a specific example that happened in April, May last year. So I blackmailed my university to send me to Delhi, as you do, because no one wants to give you money to do research anymore. So I went to Delhi a week before the election started, and elections in India, they last for a long time, because it's like, millions of people have to vote. So it lasts about a month. It's not like, you know, in Malta, where on a Sunday afternoon, probably, you cast your vote and you know 3 hours later, right? Something like that, yes? So it's a bit bigger. So what we were focusing on, and it's a team of people, I will tell you who they were, we're looking at the use particularly of WhatsApp, because the last elections, they were talked about as Facebook elections, but these elections were talked about WhatsApp, the dark social. Whoever I talked to was like dark social, because on WhatsApp, you cannot easily monitor WhatsApp or infiltrate groups because of how the platform works. Although Zuckerberg wants to connect WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook and connect them in a way that competes with WeChat, the Chinese thing, right? And with the Libra coin thing, it's all going to become one thing or whatever. Now, what the people we talked to in the particular trip focus on people that are journalists, not just from dominant newspapers and so on, but also civil rights, human rights activists. There was people from the Communist Party, people that documentary investigative journalists, like these kind of people. And we wanted to know, okay, so what are the key issues, basically, to put it simply, when these actors engage through social media in India before the elections? Okay, so these are the people I work with. So Adrija Day was my former PhD student, and she's doing really well. Her thesis was about the rape in that bus in the middle of the day in India, and she looked at the anti-rape online activism movement, and I asked her, to come and help me in Delhi to do the fieldwork together. And she did some of the translations from that were not in English of the interviews. And then we did a very simple one with this Omani guy. He's a wonderful PhD student at the University of Leicester. And we collected just to look at across, kind of like on that month, what was going on across. And I want to show you some of this because what really surprised me, we have shown very little of what is actually happening. And I can be a very theoretical person, but I like to actually show. So this is that month, and this is what was going on in terms of media reach, the positive, the negative, that kind of stuff. Then we have who was more popular mentions, right? And there are some people there that are actually individuals, okay? However, if you go to, influential social media authors, okay, what you start to see is there's a lot of mainstream corporate media. So they were actually really calling the shots in the Indian elections, and it wasn't some kind of maverick person, rebel, in some kind of blog in their basement, okay? These are corporate mainstream media were actually the most influential. And then, lo and behold, what are the most active sites? Okay, let's see. Oh, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. So you see, like, who is actually dominating this digital lovely public sphere is these corporations, okay? And I think it is like a very sort of thing that can be actually evidence in terms of across social media platforms during those elections. So it's not something we can say, oh, the corporate media, the corporate media, social media platforms, they are actually the most influential actors, and we can actually measure that, okay? So influential sites, again, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, and so on, and you can see, how this hierarchy works. Oh, this is the hashtags, okay. And then I want to talk about something that is about not the social media sphere, but it's about me actually going there and meeting people and talking to them about it. And some of them were fantastically interesting people. People that have been dragged into court cases, people that have been persecuted for their journalism, some very intense people. One of them, I asked her, so she did this incredible report about the RSS. The RSS is the fundamentalist Hindu movement, and this is where Modi is coming from. That's how the Modi party emerged, right? So that fundamentalist Hindu organizations, they go to the tribal regions of India and they say to parents, if you give me your child, I will educate it and help it and so on. And then they take these children and they put them in places not to sexually exploit them or work exploit them, to indoctrinate them to this Hindu fundamentalism and create cadres and so on. So this woman uncovers this ring, right, of abducting, and so on. And I said to her, well, does your family support you that you do this job? And she said, well, my family only accepted me when I got married. So it is a different thing. Public space is dominated by men. Like, so I'm in the train, inside the train, left and right, there's like us, two women, the rest of them are men. Everywhere. It's like a different thing. It's a different thing if you haven't been in certain places, certain cultures, political cultures, how the space works, the political space. It is worth going because we cannot do digital media and the policy of it if we don't actually go to this place and talk to these people, right? For instance, the people that are say to me, we have thick skin, we're threatened with rape, that we're getting text messages to our phones saying, this is your wife, this is where you live, and we're going to abduct her and kill her, and so on. You get stories about how the Indian government, because it has been a extreme right-wing government, right, there. And also you have stories how these corporations that are dominant there basically are engaging. And one of them is very interesting, the lynchings, the WhatsApp lynchings. So there are places where you have to have a certain amount of digital literacy, right, to be on Twitter, Facebook, or whatever you are. But if you have just a mobile and you have WhatsApp, you can receive a video that says, the foreigners are going to come and abduct your children. So we had situations where random people passing by selling whatever blankets or whatever they're selling, they were attacked, beaten, and killed. Okay, so you have the scenarios where WhatsApp had to create big posters that said, don't believe what you see on our platform. Now, this is post-truth society, I think, at its most vivid, where a platform has to basically see what they're going to do. They start hiring lawyers, people on the ground, and so on. The other things that, that is very interesting, I think, is how activists, and in particular in relation to caste in India, right, they try to reclaim political space, and they try to actually bring change and so on. There are wonderful stories that I'm out of time, but maybe we can talk about in the questions. And I thought I would leave you with this, where you have to, this is a car that is driven on its own, but you know, like, sometimes it stops doing that. So this is where I think, for me, in my image thought, I think we have let these digital platforms run. And we need to basically wake up and try to take over the steering of the situation if we're going to have any hope of affecting any change. Thank you very much.